Hi, I'm Gaurav Jain, and in this session, we will learn how do we use the Call Studio element Dialogflow. As we understood earlier, this is the flow which is the simplest way to integrate Dialogflow voice bot into the Call Studio. So in this 12.5 release, Call Studio will have following new elements, and you can use this element to create your application which will drive your voice bot. So to simplify this integration of Dialogflow element, we have provided some sample application. You can get those sample application in the GitHub URL of CVP. At this URL in GitHub in Cisco DevNet, you can find the sample application for customer voice assistant, and there are multiple applications which are provided here. We will first look at in this video DF audio and DF text, and you can check out these application and get the sample application. So let's have a look at what is there in this flow and how would you implement a voice bot. So in this element, you have certain properties configuration which you have to do. So let's try to understand them. Service account ID is the link between your Call Studio application and your voice bot or the agent which is running in Dialogflow. So you need to copy that voice service account ID from your Dialogflow account. We saw this in Dialogflow. So you can see this. This is the project ID which we are using in Dialogflow account, which we are mentioning is service account ID. Another important field is the audio output, true and false. So if you set the audio output to true here, the Dialogflow bot will do the job of text to speech conversion for you. So when you do the recognition in this flow, so each of the iteration which happens for Dialogflow element, your speech will be streamed to Google. Google will do the processing of your speech and do the speech to text conversion, process it, match it to the intent, find the answers what is to be given to the customer, and if this variable is set to true, then in response you will get the audio and CVP will play that audio. While if you set it to false, in that case the response will not be audio, it will be text, and then you need to use text to speech engine to synthesize it separately. So there is another example here which is DF text. In that I have used that example where I have set the audio output to false. So in that case you will have to play that manually. You need to configure your NLU engine, as well as you have to configure ASR TTS in your configuration. So you need to get a separate key for that. So if you are using audio output true, Google will bill you differently, and if you are using audio output false, the bill will be differently. However, you will be charged for TTS separately. VVB caches the prompt. So if you are using the text to speech prompt, same prompt multiple time, VVB will cache those prompt based on the text. So if the text is different, it will be a new cache, but the same prompt will be cached. So you can optimize the performance using that. Okay, so going forward, there are parameters like no input timeout. You can set that. No input count, how many times you will ask if the user has not given input, and that count is maintained by using this exit state, no input count. If this count is met, then it will exit from the loop. In Dialogflow recognition, if let's say you are working in a noisy environment, and if you want to if your voice is not getting stopped and you're not getting the answer, then you can terminate the speech by mentioning this character hash. So your output will be terminated. The user's output can be terminated by user by pressing this hash key. So it is not doing any other kind of DTMF recognition, but only this character what you are mentioning in this flow, which will be used for the speech termination as a speech termination character. Next parameter is the initiation text. This is a text which will be used by this element to initiate the dialog with the dialog flow. So when first time this element is hit, you need to initiate the dialog with dialog flow, and this hello text will be sent to dialog flow, and you need to provide a training for dialog flow agent so that it can understand this keyword, and based on that it returns the intent, and that intent is returned, then dialog flow will continue from then on, because the audio will be returned in that case, and this flow will continue in that case. However, if you are using audio output to false, you don't need to bother about this, because anyway you are not getting the audio from dialog flow and you are driving it. You can also mention max input time, for how long you want to wait for the customer to give utterance, and also you can mention the final silence duration, that after user stops speaking, and after that for how long you want to wait before you give the response to customer. So these are the parameters you need to understand in order to implement this element. While from the flow point of view, there are exit states which are implemented here: max no input and done. So let's understand how it works. Max no input is triggered when you hit the maximum number of no input event by the customer, and done is when you have received the input from the customer which may or may not have matched an intent. So when you are done, you put a decision editor, let's say, and you check for the intents. So there are some new variables which are introduced in this agent, which you can have a look, and if you can check if the intent is agent transfer, let's say, or exit, then you can handle that, and if it is not complete, then you continue. So is complete is the variable which is maintaining the state that your inputs for this particular intent is not complete, and it will continue to ask the subsequent questions. So if it is, let's say, exit or transfer agent, then what we are doing is we are coming out from the loop and then we are proceeding further. But if it is not, then we are going into the loop so that we ask the subsequent question. So your loop keeps going on like this until you are done with the dialog flow agent, and then you exit from here. Meanwhile, also, if you are interested in collecting this information or storing the intent and passing this data back to the ICM for the queuing purpose, you can store the information by using a set value parameter. You can have a look at the sample application. You can store the intent, or you can store the utterance, what is spoken by customer. You can accumulate, you can program it the way you want, and finally when you have collected those information, you can send them as an external param and send that data back to the ICM and use them accordingly. One more thing we should see is how you create this application, the global properties. The global properties for this is has few new parameters, like your adapter voice XML gateway adapter should be either Cisco DTMF or voice XML 2.1 with Cisco DTMF. So you should be using these adapters only. You cannot use Neon's adapter while you are using dialog flow based recognition or ASR based recognition. Another implementation here is voice name. So you can get the list of voices supported by Google in Google's website. The references to that is given in the specification guide as well, the element specification guide. In the element specification guide, you can also have a look at the properties which we just went through. All those properties are mentioned in details there. However, there are some custom properties also available. The properties like the payload, if you want to pass some custom payload to Dialogflow so that you can use it there, you can pass. So let's say if you have some information in your CRM data which you want to pass to Dialogflow, you can pass it in payload. You can pass the time zone from here or geolocation. uh, Also, if you have some other information like session entity types, so let's say Dialogflow has entity types already defined, but if you want to pass some new entity types based on your local database, you can pass those, and Google's API will absorb it. Also, you can enable the sentiment analysis requests config. So if you enable this, the response will give you the sentiment status for each query, uh, what you have done with the dialog flow. So for, and another parameter is the single utterance. Single utterance is the parameter which you enable where you want Google to do the silence detection. So for every small utterance, the silence will be detected at Google. So if you are expecting your user to speak a very long sentence with multiple pauses, then only you can set it to false, but by default this parameter is enabled. Another thing is the recognition model. The model is the way your recognition is done by the recognition engine, whether you are using the Dialogflow element or you are using the recognition element. So by default, the model, when you use the enterprise edition of Dialogflow, is set to phone call, which is tuned to give you the best results. But if you are not using enterprise, if you are using standard, you can override this value to default or some other model as mentioned in the documentation of Google. So you can override these values. So these custom values which are given here, how do you add it? You can add them in the elements configuration in the voice XML property. So property name and value you can mention here. And going back to the properties what we were discussing, yeah, so voice name, as I was mentioning earlier, you can get the list of voices which are supported by Google for TTS. So whether your audio output is true or false, whether you are using TTS for text to speech operation separately, or you are using audio output to get the output, in both the cases this value will be honored. And you can use a standard voice or you can use a wavenet voice, both you can use. Encoding, you should be using always UTF-8. That is what is supported to work in interoperate with the Google in this case. You should be mentioning the language which you want to use. Languages other than EN/US are subject to the support of TTS by Google's engine in case of Dialogflow or in case of recognition engine. So you should match these languages. We will have a separate section where we'll go in detail about the multilingual application and changing this language and other things. So in this, these are the important configuration which you should be taking care of in order to have the global properties. These global properties are mentioned at this level. Some of these properties you may be able to override at the element level as well. Let's say you want to change the voice name, so you can change the voice name later point of time as well. So this is the way you can create a sample application. And let's go back to the DF text. There is one more thing I want to highlight there. So in this application, the only difference, as I mentioned earlier, is you are using the audio output false. And when you do audio output false, you will have to have another element where you will play the prompts which are received from Dialogflow. So this is the text which is received from Dialogflow, and you are playing them using prompt. And as I mentioned earlier, these prompts, if they are same prompts which you are using, then those will be cached and it will be played from the platform engine. And rest of the flow is same in this case, the way we used the earlier flow.